Welcome back to the True Crime Collection, where Jen and Brian are diving into the world's most chilling crimes. From unsolved mysteries to dark endeavors, they uncover the stories that will keep you hooked. This is the True Crime Collection.
All right, ready for another deep dive?
Always. What do we got?
It's one of those stories,
Oh, yeah.
it reminds us that even in the most ordinary places, things can go very, very wrong.
Oh, okay.
We're headed back to Denver in 1941.
Okay.
World War II is looming, but in the city's quieter neighborhoods, life seems to move at a different pace.
Interesting.
This is where we find the story of Theodore Coneys,
Theodore Coneys.
the Denver Spider-Man.
Denver Spider.
You ever heard of him?
I have, yeah.
Okay.
It's one of those cases that really captures the imagination.
Right.
Because it blends true crime with this almost gothic sense of mystery.
Exactly. And it all centers around this house at 3335 West Moncrieff Place.
Okay.
It's a grand old Victorian, a little worse for wear.
Mm-hmm.
The owner, 73-year-old Philip Peters,
Okay.
is a retired railroad man living a solitary life there.
Mm-hmm.
His wife, Helen, is recovering in the hospital after a fall.
Oh, okay.
And you get this sense that Philip is feeling pretty isolated.
Yeah, that sense of isolation really sets the stage for all the unsettling events to come.
Yeah.
Here's a man in his twilight years in a big, creaky house.
Right.
And he starts to notice things that just don't add up.
Like what?
Small things at first.
Uh-huh.
Like a faint smell of tobacco, even though he hasn't smoked indoors for years.
Hmm.
Or a floorboard creaking when there should be no one else around.
It's like those classic ghost stories, right?
Right.
Where the house itself feels haunted.
Yeah, exactly.
But in this case, it's not a ghost that Philip has to worry about.
No, and unfortunately, it's something much more real
Yeah.
and much more dangerous.
So who is Theodore Coneys?
Well,
What brings him into Philip's life?
Coneys is a man on the fringes of society.
Okay.
He's 59 years old, has dealt with illness and poverty for most of his life. At one point, he dreamed of being an artist, but those aspirations had long since faded.
Oh, wow.
By the time he encounters Philip, he's desperate, hungry,
Yeah.
and looking for any kind of refuge.
And he finds it in Philip's attic. That's crazy.
It is.
How does it even happen?
It's almost by chance, really.
Okay.
Coneys had met Philip briefly at a local musicians club. And months earlier, when he was at his lowest point, he went to Philip's house hoping for some help. He found the back door unlocked, and while searching for food, he stumbled upon this hidden crawl space leading to the attic.
Oh, okay.
And in that cramped, dark space, he decided to stay.
So he just decided to hide up there.
Yeah.
For how long?
Months.
Yeah.
Wow.
He lived in that attic, moving like a shadow,
Oh my gosh.
coming down only at night to steal food while Philip was asleep.
That's just chilling.
It is.
It's like something out of Edgar Allan Poe.
Right.
Imagine the psychological toll of living like that.
I know.
Constantly hiding, never knowing if you'll be discovered.
Yeah, it's a testament to how desperate Coneys must have been.
Right.
But of course, this situation couldn't last forever.
No.
The tension builds, and on the evening of October 17th, 1941,
It all comes to a tragic head.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here.
All right.
What happened?
Philip had been at his neighbor's for dinner
Okay.
and comes home late.
Mhm.
The house is quiet,
Yeah.
maybe a little too quiet.
Oh.
And then he hears a noise from the kitchen.
Oh, man, I can only imagine what's going through his mind at that moment.
Right.
Pure terror.
I'm sure it was pure terror.
Yeah.
Philip grabs a flashlight and heads toward the sound.
Okay.
And there, in the dim light, he sees Theodore Coneys.
So after months of hiding, he gets caught.
Yeah.
What happens next? Does Coneys try to run?
No.
Oh.
It's a moment of pure panic for both men.
Oh, wow.
Coneys grabs an iron poker from near the fireplace
Okay.
and attacks Philip.
Oh, no, this is where it turns violent, isn't it?
It's a brutal attack.
Okay.
The sources we have don't go into graphic detail,
Right.
but it's clear that Philip didn't stand a chance.
This is awful.
It is.
What does Coneys do after?
After killing Philip, he does something truly bizarre.
What?
He drags the body into the study
Yeah.
and then retreats back to the attic.
What?
He literally crawls back into his hiding place, leaving behind this scene of unimaginable horror.
It's almost like he reverts to what he knows.
Yeah.
His only sense of safety in that cramped attic space.
Right.
But how does he think he can get away with this?
That's the mystery, isn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe he thought he could remain hidden, that
Yeah.
the discovery wouldn't be made immediately.
Right.
But of course, reality sets in quickly.
So what happens next? Who finds Philip's body?
The next morning, a neighbor notices that something's amiss and calls the police.
Okay.
They find Philip's body, but the house is locked from the inside. There's no sign of forced entry, and nothing of value seems to be missing.
Wow, a real locked room mystery.
Yeah.
The police must have been completely baffled.
Yeah, they were.
Do they suspect Coneys at all?
They do question him,
Okay.
along with a number of other transients and vagrants who were in Denver at the time. But Coneys has no apparent connection to the crime scene,
Yeah.
and he denies any involvement.
Wow.
So with no real leads, the case goes cold.
This is unbelievable. He just stays in the attic.
I know.
Even while the police were investigating?
Believe it or not, he does.
Wow.
The house is eventually rented out to a new family,
Okay.
the Burtons.
The Burtons, all right.
And this is where the story takes an even more unsettling turn.
Oh, no.
Mrs. Burton starts experiencing things that make her feel like she's not alone in the house.
Uh-oh.
Food goes missing, she hears strange noises at night,
Yeah.
and there's this constant sense of being watched.
Wait, is Coney still up there?
He is. No.
He never left.
No way, this is too much.
I know.
What happens next? Does Mrs. Burton confront him?
Actually, it's her husband who investigates.
Okay.
He hears the noises one night, grabs a flashlight, and heads up to the attic.
Okay.
And there, hiding among the dust and cobwebs,
Yeah.
he finds Theodore Coneys.
Oh my gosh.
That must have been a terrifying sight. I can't even imagine.
I know.
After all this time, he's finally caught.
He is.
Do the police arrest him?
They do.
Okay.
The Burtons call the police, who arrive and force open the crawl space. There they find Coneys looking more like a ghost than a man.
Oh, wow.
He's thin, pale,
Yeah.
and clearly deeply disturbed.
Living like that for so long would take its toll on anyone.
Absolutely.
So does he finally confess?
He does. He
Yeah.
does. Under questioning, Coneys admits to killing Philip Peters.
Oh, wow.
He tells the police about the desperation that led him to the attic, the fear that consumed him,
Yeah.
and the moment of panic that resulted in Philip's death.
It's a chilling confession.
It is.
What happens next?
Well, the news of his capture and confession spreads like wildfire.
I bet.
Coneys is quickly labeled the Denver Spider-Man by the press,
Yeah.
and his story becomes national news.
A man living undetected in an attic, murdering the homeowner,
Right.
then hiding there for months.
It's crazy.
It's like something out of a nightmare.
Yeah.
So what happened at the trial?
What?
Was she declared insane?
Not quite.
Okay.
But to get to that,
Yeah.
we need to dive into the legal proceedings and public reactions a little bit more.
Feels like we got a lot more to unpack.
Oh, we do.
All right. Well, we'll be back after a quick break.
Sounds good. Welcome back.
So before the break, we were talking about Theodore Coneys' capture and his confession to the murder of Philip Peters.
Right.
His story really grabbed the public's attention.
It did.
You mentioned the Denver Spider-Man
Yeah.
nickname.
Yeah.
I can only imagine the media frenzy surrounding this case.
Oh, yeah.
It has all the elements of a sensational story.
Absolutely.
What was the atmosphere like in the courtroom?
The sources paint a picture of a tense and somber atmosphere.
Okay.
And Coneys himself was a bit of an enigma.
Okay.
He was surprisingly calm throughout the trial, almost resigned to his fate.
It's almost as if the weight of his actions, the burden of carrying that secret for so long,
Yeah.
finally broke him.
It's a very insightful observation. Yeah.
Do you think that Coneys represents those who, kind of fall through the cracks of society?
I do.
Can you expand on that a little?
Well, think about the context of the time.
Okay.
This was the 1940s, a period when mental health resources were extremely limited,
Right.
often quite harsh.
Nah.
It's not hard to imagine that someone like Coneys, struggling with both poverty and likely undiagnosed mental health issues,
Yeah.
would found it almost impossible to get the help he needed.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
It adds another layer of tragedy to this whole situation.
Exactly. And it raises questions about whether things might have turned out differently if Coneys had had access to support and resources.
So getting back to the trial, what was the verdict?
Coneys was found guilty of murder
Okay.
and sentenced to life in prison.
Wow.
The details of the case were just too disturbing,
Right.
and the evidence too strong for any other outcome.
It's hard to imagine what went through his mind as he received that sentence.
Yeah.
Do the sources offer any insights into his state of mind at that point?
They suggest that he remained somewhat detached,
Okay.
almost indifferent to his situation, as if the reality of his crime never truly sunk in.
So it's almost as if that attic space,
Yeah.
that place of isolation and fear,
Right.
had become his reality, even within the confines of a prison cell.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
This is really heartbreaking.
It is.
A man driven to such extremes by desperation and likely mental illness?
Yeah,
But his story has such a profound impact, I imagine.
it did.
What happened to the house on West Moncrieff Place after all of this?
It's still there today.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But its history is forever marked by the events of 1941.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the story of the Denver Spider-Man became entwined with the house itself,
Right.
turning it into a place of both fascination and unease.
It wouldn't surprise me if it became one of those local legends, a place people whisper about.
I think it did.
Did anyone ever live there again?
Some say it remained vacant for years, while others claim new families moved in but never stayed long.
Oh, wow.
There are stories of unsettling occurrences.
Like what?
Strange noises, unexplained drafts,
Yeah,
and that persistent feeling of being watched.
that's creepy.
Yes.
Did anyone experience anything specific?
Well, some people even claim to hear the faint sounds of a mandolin playing late at night.
Really?
A ghostly echo, perhaps, of Philip Peters' favorite pastime.
Oh, wow.
Whether those stories are true or just local folklore,
Right.
they add to the eerie legacy of the house and the tragic events that unfolded there.
So beyond the fear,
Yeah.
this case must have also raised questions about social responsibility.
I think it did.
Did it spark any conversations about poverty, mental health,
It did.
or how society treats those who are struggling?
It did, but perhaps not as much as we might hope for today.
Right.
Remember, this was a different time, with different social norms and understandings of mental health.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
But even back then, surely there must have been some discussion about how the system failed Coneys.
There were certainly voices calling for more compassion and support for those living in poverty, for improved mental health services.
Right.
But those voices were often drowned out by the sensationalism of the case itself.
Yeah.
The focus was more on the crime, the mystery, the Spider-Man angle,
Yeah.
rather than the underlying societal issues that contributed to Coneys' desperation.
It's a shame, really.
It is.
It feels like a missed opportunity for real societal change.
Perhaps, but even if those conversations weren't as prominent as they might be today,
Right.
the case did leave a lasting impact.
Yeah.
It forced people to confront the reality that darkness can exist anywhere,
Hmm.
even in seemingly safe and ordinary places.
Right.
And it planted a seed, however small, for greater awareness and compassion for those who are struggling and marginalized.
It's a glimmer of hope in this otherwise dark tale.
It is.
But before we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I'm curious about Theodore Coneys' fate.
Okay.
What happened to him after he was sentenced?
Oh.
Did he ever express remorse for his actions?
That's where things get a little murky.
Yeah.
The sources offer conflicting accounts of his life in prison.
Interesting. What do they say?
Some reports suggest that he remained detached, almost indifferent to his situation,
Okay.
as if the reality of his crime never truly sunk in.
Wow.
Others suggest there were moments of clarity,
Okay.
flashes of regret and despair.
It's hard to imagine living with the weight of such a horrific act.
Absolutely. But to truly understand the complexity of Coneys' situation,
Yeah.
we need to delve a little deeper into the psychological effects of prolonged isolation and trauma.
All right, let's do that. We're back, and before the break, we were discussing Theodore Coneys' life in prison
Right.
and the conflicting accounts of his mental state.
Yeah.
It's hard to fathom the psychological impact of living in isolation for so long,
Yeah.
both in that attic and then later in prison. How would that trauma have manifested itself? What kind of insights do the sources offer?
Well, some sources suggest that Coneys exhibited signs of what we might now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder.
PTSD.
Yeah, PTSD.
Okay.
He experienced flashbacks, nightmares, and a persistent sense of detachment from reality. Imagine being trapped in that cycle of fear and anxiety,
Right.
even after being removed from the situation that caused it.
It's like his mind never truly escaped that attic.
Precisely. And the isolation of prison life likely exacerbated his condition.
Yeah.
The lack of social interaction, the constant reminders of his crime,
Right.
would have made it nearly impossible for him to process his trauma and find any kind of healing.
Do we know anything about how the prison system treated him? Did they offer any kind of psychological support or therapy?
Unfortunately, in that era,
Yeah.
the understanding and treatment of mental illness within the prison system was severely lacking.
Yeah.
It was more about punishment than rehabilitation. It's unlikely that Coneys received any meaningful psychological support.
That's really sad.
Yeah.
It sounds like he was failed by the system at every turn.
He was.
So did he ever express any remorse for what he did?
The sources are a bit ambiguous on that.
Okay.
Some suggest he remained detached and emotionless, unable or unwilling to confront the magnitude of his crime. Others hint at moments of clarity where he seemed to grasp the horror of his actions and expressed regret.
Yeah.
But those moments were fleeting,
Right.
overshadowed by the profound psychological damage he had suffered.
It makes you wonder about the nature of guilt and remorse, doesn't it?
It does.
How can someone commit such a horrific act
Right.
and yet seem unable to fully process or accept responsibility for it?
It's a complex question,
Yeah.
and it speaks to the profound impact of trauma and mental illness on a person's capacity for empathy and self-awareness. In Coneys' case, it's possible that the trauma he experienced both before and after the murder created a psychological barrier, preventing him from fully confronting his actions and their consequences.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
So ultimately, what can we learn from the story of Theodore Coneys, the Denver Spider-Man?
I think his story serves as a stark reminder of the human capacity for both darkness and despair.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about the shadows that exist within our society.
Right.
But it also reminds us of the importance of compassion, understanding,
Yeah.
and the need for a system that supports those who are struggling rather than punishing them further.
It makes you think about those who are living on the margins of society today.
Yeah,
Are we doing enough to help them?
it's a good question.
Are we providing the resources and support they need to avoid falling into despair and desperation?
Those are questions we all need to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
Coneys' story, as unsettling as it is,
Right.
can serve as a catalyst for conversations about poverty, mental health, and societal responsibility.
It's a reminder that we can't just turn away from those who are struggling. We need to be aware, be compassionate, and be willing to extend a helping hand.
Exactly, because while the story of the Denver Spider-Man may be a relic of the past,
Yeah.
the issues it raises are as relevant today as they were back in 1941.
This has been a truly fascinating and thought-provoking deep dive.
It has.
We've explored a dark chapter in Denver's history.
Yeah.
And in doing so, we've uncovered some important insights about the human condition, the fragility of life, and the need for greater compassion and understanding in our world.
Well said.
And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Sounds good.
We hope it's prompted some introspection, some conversation,
Yeah.
and perhaps a renewed commitment to being more aware of the needs of those around us.
Absolutely.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.